This week on Church and State with Dave Pellowe, I'm having a sit-down conversation with Dan Ryan, a board member of the Australia-China Council, the peak independent advisory body providing advice to the Australian government on commercial and strategic issues relating to our relationship with China. He's a lawyer who worked and lived in Beijing, Shanghai and Hong Kong for over 15 years before returning to Australia, and speaks and reads Mandarin Chinese at a very high professional level. Dan is also actively involved in public policy matters in Asia and has been a director of Hong Kong's leading liberal market think tank, the Lion Rock Institute, for over 10 years. He has close connections to similar think tanks, as well as policymakers and government officials across the region. He has contributed to publications including the Wall Street Journal, the Australian, the South China Morning Post, and the Australian Financial Review. Dan Ryan, ni hao.
Ni hao. Good to be here.
Thank you very much. Now tell me about it sounds like fascinating work, living in China and working there in an overseas country. I'd love to speak another language. Tell me about your experience in China.
Okay, so I wasn't born speaking Chinese.
No.
I had to learn it from scratch. Many were. That's the easy way to learn a language.
Yes.
I studied at the ANU. Actually, my Chinese teacher was Kevin Rudd's Chinese teacher. Gave him his Chinese name, gave me mine. So she's been christening people Chinese speakers over the years.
Is that a thing?
Well, not I'll use it in a very loose sense. Yeah. But you get a Chinese name because people don't generally use your English name when you're speaking Chinese.
Right.
And so I studied there, and then professionally I worked as a lawyer from 2000 until 2013 in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Beijing for a bit as well. And
so that wasn't trial law, was it?
No, so that was predominantly advice to multinational companies who were investing in China, contracting with Chinese parties, licensing their technology, selling product in China. And then as the nature of the sort of China changed, growing over from 2000 until 2013, increasingly Chinese companies being involved in transactions outside of China, buying companies, licensing their own technology. So over that period of 13 years, things changed dramatically.
I'd be fascinated in the differences between Chinese law and Australian law. Obviously, an Australian law degree isn't going to be enough to be a registered, admitted lawyer in China.
No. So the foreigners who are practicing legal services who are based in mainland China don't get involved in that. We work with Chinese local counsel. In Hong Kong, it's a common law jurisdiction like Australia, and so there is the rule of law and courts with wigs and the rest of it. So that you can get involved in representing clients in court in Hong Kong. In China, so the laws that have developed in China, really the modern ones really only started being developed after about 1980, and it was very rudimentary to begin with. Now I often say to people, the problem is not that China doesn't have any laws, which is a common perception, but in many ways they have too many laws, contradictory ones, local level ones, bureaucratic edicts telling people this, that and the other. It becomes very complicated. Good for lawyers, but it makes it more difficult to sort of weave your way through the system.
Wow.
But on the one hand, there's been more predictability than there once was, more law and less policy in the decision making, but it is still very different to Western jurisdictions. There is still a politicized legal framework. There is still the potential for the courts are not independent in the way that Australian courts should be.
Yeah. How does that work?
Well, the
judge has to see if the local governor, premier, wants the case to go one way or the other? Yeah, well, the thing is, many decisions aren't pure political in nature. They don't, but if they get up to a particular level and they threaten sort of local or provincial or national political interests or party interests, that's when there's much more pressure brought to bear on. So it's kind of partisan justice. It can be. That said, at a local level, if you're just doing a very routine property transaction,
or you're enforcing your IP at a very local level and it doesn't threaten anyone up the chain, there's a reasonable amount of predictability, certainly much more than there once was, say, 30 years ago.
Is there any kind of legal protection even at lower levels where, let's say, you might be just having a neighbourhood dispute over a fence or a broken contract in low-level business people? Is there any kind of legal advantage to being a member of the Communist Party?
There shouldn't be. And
reality, though.
There often won't be, except when that particular member of the Communist Party is particularly well connected
Right.
or has particular business interest, and then you might run into issues.
Yeah.
But like I said, the lower down you go, the less likely you are to have politicised justice. The higher up you go, the more likely it is to involve inevitably have party issues.
Is that a
involved.
higher factor in Chinese law than money is in Australian law? In Australia, it's kind of true that he who has the most money wins.
Yeah.
Is it similar in China, or both can interfere with the justice you can expect?
Yeah, well, I mean, that shouldn't be the case in Australia. I mean, I know it's very idealistic to say so, that you can bog down or prevail through having high-powered QCs or just sort of have the resources to effectively intimidate another party. But that's a problem with Australian justice, but it's a different problem to the one that is in China. Typically, the ones who are politically connected in China often also have a lot of money. Sometimes the ones in Australia also politically can have a lot of money, but I wouldn't put them in exactly the same category. Okay. It's a different nature of the disputes.
The question I'm asking is, does China have both pollutions of an ideal outcome?
Yeah, except I'd say that inevitably there are few people, if any, who, although they may claim otherwise, that if they get very rich in China are not in some way connected in some shape or form to the party. Right. That's not always the case in Australia. We have two parties. Some are very, one side or the other, and can be rich one side or the other. I mean, it is a multi-party democracy. China is not. So that's there are some key differences too.
Let's move to the political system. Give us an overview of what politics is like in China. Very, very short history.
Sure.
Don't be a history teacher, but and maybe just encapsulate the differences between Australian political structure, Chinese political structure, and how the relationship is going between China and Australia.
Okay. Well, I guess to really simplify things, because it is a one-party state, all the politics occur within that party. So it's, again, to take a very loose analogy, it's a little bit like the fights that occur, say, within, I don't know, the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, much more so the Labor Party. You have particular factions that have particular issues that are strong to them. They want to make sure that their person gets to the top. You have other factions who have different personalities, identity issues.
Does China have a general election?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So local candidates would be fighting. It'd be members of the party only who are voting for the local candidates. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, again, there are local level so-called village elections, but there's no and between different candidates of the Chinese Communist Party. But so
you can have this communist or this communist.
Yeah, that basically, or different degrees of red. But there's no national. Once you can't set up a party separate to the Chinese Communist Party and then have branches across the country with a platform which is different to the main one and campaign.
Yeah.
You can, if you see in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Hong Kong's slightly different. In Taiwan, you have, election posters and you have platforms and you have campaign rallies. You have election ads on TV. In Chinese, it's a striking difference between the two systems.
Yeah.
So that's and it's refreshing. It's nice. You go to Taiwan or Hong Kong, you see those, and you think, oh, that's familiar. I remember those from back home.
Yeah. So there's no federal general election or provincial/state elections, but villages can elect who their local communist representative is.
Simplified. That's the way to say it.
And can non-communist party members in the village participate in those elections, or is it only party members?
You can participate there are slight differences to how they run these things across China, which is a big place.
Yeah.
But that's essentially the way to understand it. Villagers have the right to assess their local leader, and that dovetails with what I was saying before with Chinese justice. At a local level, you get a certain amount of, to some degree, non-politicized justice, or non-politicized sort of. People are looking after trash and that type of thing. Yeah. Whereas if you move up the system in China, you don't get... in fact, one of the big things that happened in China sort of over the last 5 years was the arrest of a guy called Bo Xilai, who was a very ambitious governor from he made his name in northeast China. And then it moved down to Sichuan. He was actually the Minister of Commerce of China for a period of time too. Now, he was much more overt in campaigning for the role that the current president of China, Xi Jinping, currently holds. Okay. And that's what the party does not like. And so he got into trouble, and his wife was a little bit nutty, and she murdered a British guy, according to the facts, and then he's now in jail. Wow. And it's quite interesting, and it just goes to show, you talked about the relationship with Australia and China. I actually attended a function, an Australian Chamber of Commerce event in Beijing, where John Howard spoke and Kevin Rudd was in the room, and John Howard was, I'd like to welcome my good friend Bo Xilai from the Ministry of Commerce, that type of statement. And well, guess what? He's in jail now, and he was, not necessarily the most guy you'd like to be a pal with. So that's an illustration of how sometimes Australian political leaders and others get into waters they don't fully understand up there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so the way to avoid that would be to have somebody from... Would it be their own governmental bureaucrats and staff who are meant to know the lay of the land there, or does something like the Lion Rock Institute come along and advise government, don't mention this guy, he's in trouble?
No. So the Lion Rock Institute is a Hong Kong-based think tank, and we actually have rules of engagement, which are policy not people, economics not social matters, and Hong Kong not China. And the reason we had those quite restrictive rules is because we wanted to focus on Hong Kong,
We'll talk more about them next. Just sum up, where's the relationship with Australia and China politically? Where's the similarities and the possible tensions with our cultural philosophies and approaches to economics and society? Well,
I guess you'd have to say it has become... China has just loomed so much larger in Australia, in its importance to Australia since 2000. When I first started working professionally in China was interesting. There were reports on TV about, isn't it growing, or isn't this, that and the other interesting, or human interest stories about pandas or God knows what. But now, if you read the financial press, it's almost like every second story talks about, and people mention Chinese companies in a matter-of-fact way, in a way they just wouldn't have done in 2000. It would be much more like, Egyptian company or Indian company, sort of interesting in its way. Maybe there's some sort of interesting business there, but it's much more kind of. But now China is Australia's largest trading partner, largest investment partner, arguably. That happened very quickly. That happened with, the political turnover, people involved in politics. Yep. In Australia, they have very few. There's one, Ted O'Brien at the Sunshine Coast actually has a bit of China background, but there's very few with bona fides in understanding China, speaking the language and the rest of it. I mean, we have... Australians understand a fair bit about the United States. We go across there, we have a lot of American culture, Civil War, Declaration of Independence, all that sort of stuff, right? We have, cable TV, but we don't anywhere near have the same level of understanding at the political level in Canberra that others do.
Well, let's take a break, and in the next segment, I'll ask you about the Lion Rock Institute.
Okay, sounds good.
And even what is a think tank.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please like it and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd love to keep you informed, so head over to churchandstate.com.au and subscribe to email updates. We can keep you in the loop. Also, we've got another great video I think you'd love right there.